All right, let's get started. Today is going to be a bit more of a roadmap call than our last monthly community call. Just as a reminder, this meeting is recorded and we expect everyone to be kind and courteous. So, yeah, with that, I've shared our meeting doc link in the chat. So if you can access that, please go ahead and sign in if you feel comfortable with us contacting you and all of that. From there, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Shakti Vetribel. I am a program manager on the Azure Container Compute team and one of the PMs working on Azure Service Operator. And I have a few folks from the engineering team here with me today to provide some updates. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a few general updates for Azure Service Operator today. One of which being that it's now available on Operator Hub. We've also done quite a bit of work on OpenShift enablement in general. Christian, do you want to go ahead and talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So the main things that we've done, now there is an Operator Hub bundle for the Operator. So it's available on operatorhub.io and also in the OpenShift sort of built-in Operator store. And that sort of just makes it more available to more users ideally, and potentially has a better story than Helm for evolution of CRDs as we go on. We've definitely seen some problems where at the moment Helm doesn't update CRDs, and that has caused issues for some users. So that should be pretty useful. Some other changes in the OpenShift sort of world is to enable using the operator in OpenShift is that there seem to be OpenShift seems to be a little bit more locked down in terms of what things are accessible. So we've had to add some OpenShift specific permissions to allow the operator to manage finalizers on resources. And the other bit that's only just landed is including automation for generating new Operator Hub bundles in our repository, because the first one was done primarily by Matt Dawn at Red Hat and was kind of a manual process, but now we've sort of taken that and automated it into our thing so that releasing future versions of that Operator Hub bundle should be much easier, much quicker. So yeah, that's OpenShift stuff, I think.
Awesome, thank you for that, Christian. Beyond that, in terms of general updates, we've had a few bug fixes roll out recently just to improve how we're handling resource reconciliation. I think beyond that, we can go ahead and look at a few roadmap updates. We have been continuing to investigate what support for multi-tenant clusters is going to look like. This has been one of our more popular GitHub issues. Christian, do you want to talk a bit more about that as well?
Sure. Yeah, this is all, there's a proof of concept that Erin Corson, who I can see is in the call, did a little while ago that sort of has a story for how we can do multi-tenancy. Basically, the plan is that we have like a series of different ways to be able to find credentials that can be switched based on how the operator is installed. So those different ways are, like at the moment, everything is based on one global set of credentials that the operator uses for everything. Erin's proof of concept uses, it offers several different modes. So there are, global, like I said, there's having the secrets in a separate admin namespace. This, I think, is more useful for situations where you've got different teams managing the credentials from the team who are managing the Kubernetes resources. So that could be useful there. And then there's also, if those are the same people, then you could have the secret that provides those credentials in the same namespace as the resources you're creating. So you could still have that separated out by namespace. And then there's a fourth mode, which is like a fallback between those other three modes in order. So first local namespace, then admin namespace if it's set, and then global namespace. That'll apply to both the current operator or the resources in the current operator, but when that's all sorted out, we'll apply the same sort of lookup policies to the code-generated versions of the operators as well, or controller loops as well. So it should be the same as between both. There was I noticed there's been a bit of interest in using managed identities as well. I don't think thinking about it. I think that should just work, but I need to think a bit more about it just in case.
Yeah, I actually was just trying this morning. I don't actually think that managed identity works out of the box today.
Okay.
But maybe it does with, I don't know if Aaron's PR made any changes. Managed identity works for some stuff right now, but I don't think we use it universally. So we got to maybe do some work to make all the resource clients, I think it's just a matter of we have to create them so that they can pick it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that'll be something that we'll include in this work as well, I think, if it needs to be done in a more sort of general way. But yeah, that's multi-tenancy.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian. With that, we'll switch over to talking a bit about our code generation efforts. As we mentioned last week, most of our investment is in auto-generating CRDs as a part of the K8 infra project. I've linked the roadmap for the project in the Google Doc that I shared in our chat. So we're at a point where we've got a proof of concept, essentially working end to end for just a few resources. So we're looking to smooth things and get build-in automation in place just so that we can make sure that that'll work for more resources as well. Matt, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yep. Yeah. So as Sakvi said, we are at a point where we're able to generate some basic resources. Storage account is one of the ones we picked just because it's really simple, and that can deploy end to end through our controller, and everything is code generated. But obviously, there's some stuff that still has to happen in order to make it actually fully code generated. So right now, even though we generate all these resources, you have to manually register them with the controller. There's a bunch of manual steps in terms of exporting what types the controller is watching and all that. So one of the things that we're working on is improving that process so that not only is it generated automatically, but it's registered with the controller automatically. And that sort of is one of the remaining items before we can sort of call it an alpha, where hey, we've actually got something working really end to end. So we get that auto registration, and then I think there's a few other things, one of which I think Bevan's going to talk about in a second. So I mean, there's not a whole lot in terms of the auto registration stuff that needs to be said. I've actually got it in PR locally. Or sorry, locally in a branch, not in PR yet. But I'm sort of expecting that that's going to be merged here in the next maybe week or so. So yeah, that's the status there.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Bevan, did you want to talk about the storage versioning PR that Matt alluded to there?
Sure. So the problem we're looking to solve is that the requirements in the Kubernetes side of the equation for compatibility between different versions of a resource is that those requirements are quite rigorous, and they're far tighter than the requirements for compatibility between versions in Azure Resource Manager and ARM. So we're doing some work to enable compatibility, forward and backwards compatibility between versions in Kubernetes so that we can play well with ARM and we can play well with Kubernetes. It's sort of bridging the differences between the two services. The PR that is linked in the agenda is the first of a series of PRs that I'm working on to bring this compatibility and conversions into the generator project. There's going to be 4 or 5 PRs in sequence to get everything in place. So this is just the first cut. In under the specs subfolder in the repo, there's a full specification for what we're looking to achieve with the versioning, and the various include some case studies on the scenarios we want to support and the various solutions we've looked at, and goes into some detail about why we chose the solution that we did. Do you want me to dive into some more technical stuff, or should I just leave it there?
I think we can dive into more technical stuff afterwards if we have folks that have questions on it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but just to provide some more context around the code generation efforts, the goal here is to have pretty good coverage of like ARM or control plane level operations for a broad range of Azure services. So the initial set of services that we'll support through this approach is something that we're still deciding, but it's going to be a pretty small set. So if folks have any feedback on what services they'd like to see supported first, definitely appreciate that. And then once we've been able to prove this whole approach and this model, we'll look at expanding that number of services. And then also adding in support for day 2 operations or data plane level operations as we get feedback around that as well. It looks like we have one more item on the agenda. Christian, did you want to cover CRDs for compute resources?
Yeah, this is sort of just that we've been sort of working with, or I've been working with the compute team to go through places where, we're sort of doing code generation across lots of resources at the moment, but there are still a few places where the code generator maybe doesn't know how to understand the schema that's provided by ARM in some specific places. And so to try and sort of drill down into those and understand exactly what that schema is supposed to mean, and how best to handle that particular case in the generator, so that we get code that, or CRDs that are really useful. I think that's been useful so far. With sort of, some of those are going to be fixes on our side. Some of them might end up being tweaking the Swagger to make it, or the API specifications to make them a little bit more explicit about what kinds of types are accepted for various fields, that kind of thing. It's kind of a bit of a model for how we're going to potentially interact. Well, one thing is, if it fixes stuff in the code generator, then hopefully that'll apply across a lot of resources, or like resources from lots of different services. So that'll be really useful. If it ends up being fixes in that team's sort of API specification, then that'll be a sort of useful model for how we can work with other teams to make the same kinds of changes if we know the kinds of things that need to happen to clarify the specs. Yeah, so that's. It was just a sort of point to, they're quite keen to get all of their resources represented really nicely in the code generation. So it's been useful working with them.
Yeah, and I think it'll be really great to also use that as a model for working with other service teams as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Excited to see the progress there. Any other updates that I missed from the engineering team that we wanted to talk about?
I mean, one thing that we can highlight is, I can turn my video back on too. One thing is, I just published a new update of ASO, like maybe 5 minutes before the meeting started. So just as a heads up, that there's a new one out there now. I think the last one was a couple weeks old. And I think, as Sakti mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, there's a bunch of bug fixes primarily in this release, and some automation around more OpenShift stuff. So yeah, those are the sort of the big payloads. We're working toward trying to make some, holistic improvements to how we're doing state management and that sort of thing, so that you get better errors when something goes wrong, and it's more clear, like, what state a resource is actually in. Is it reconciling? Has it failed to reconcile? That sort of thing. So we're not done there. Like, there's still quite a bit more we'd like to do. Some of it will be breaking, and so we're sort of waiting for the right time to do that. But just as a heads up, that some stuff is coming down the pipe and some is already there in this latest release.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Anything else from the engineering team? before we open it up to Q&A?
Not for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Cool. So I guess we'll open up the floor to any questions that folks have. I see Jeff asked, where do you want me to list my resources that I would like to see first? Yeah, just feel free to post them in the chat, or you can go ahead and call it out right now if you'd like.
Or maybe the agenda might be a better place if you have access to that, just because it'll sort of be accessible after the chat goes away. It'll be super useful.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of.
I mean, it might be worth creating a GitHub issue where we can list the resources that we're going to prioritize, and people can comment or whatever there as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think GitHub issue is probably the best place.
Yeah, for now, in the meeting notes would be good.
Awesome. Any other questions from others on the meeting call? All right. Thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Cool.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.